Remington podcast, where we take a deep dive into all things ammunition. I'm your host, Audrey Mays, and today I'm sitting down with Research and Development Engineer Leland Mason.
How's it going?
And Ballistics Engineer Jimmy Lawrence.
Happy to be here again.
Today is Memorial Day, and we're going to talk about Remington through the wars. We've been there almost since the beginning, almost. So
a long time.
Yeah, a good amount of time. Jimmy, I think you should start us off. I think we start off at the Civil War.
Yeah, for the most part, you could draw the line there for where we were involved in wars because, as we've discussed, America's about to turn 250 years old, and Remington's about to turn 210 years old. And, of course, that's the brand story we've probably talked about with Eliphalet Jr. taking his barrel to town and making a rifle. He doesn't really get rolling in actually manufacturing firearms until about 1854. And then the biggest step out into volumes of firearms to fight with is the 1858 New Army. So that saw a lot of service in the Civil War, and this is obviously pre-metallic cartridge. I say it's obvious, but they were all cap and ball and muzzle loading.
Yep, sure.
So that was the first of Remington's warfighting production.
Yep, which if you look at the 1858, it's really similar to like the Colt New Army, right? Or previous to that,
it had the full frame around it, and a lot of people respected it more because it was stronger. You could load it a little hotter and a little safer.
Yep. Not as popular,
right?
But arguably, in some cases, a better gun.
I think what we'll see right now is a theme throughout this entire story of the Remington being a better product that was just not as well marketed or not as well understood, and therefore never sold anywhere near the volume of the one that was popular. So I think Colt being first made a big difference there.
Yep, and, for sure. And they also, with credit to them, had really developed the horse pistol, right? And
the 1847 Walker.
Right. And with the idea that now, which we've talked about in the past with the progression of ammunition.
In general, yeah.
People really started to rely on kind of like a sidearm, which really the Walker and the Dragoon and those type firearms, if you look at them, you're bridging the gap of what most would call a sidearm. But it technically was, and that's when people really started to see the benefit of having a repeating handgun, right?
Everything from the small sidearm that is pretty, say a 36 caliber is pretty similar to a modern 38 special in its ballistics, up to what he's referring to, those Cavalry Dragoon revolvers
Big
from the very
44s.
beginning were 44 mags loaded to 60 grains of black powder. That's all of a sudden like shooting a 45-70. So, that market had gotten really, really exciting for all the gun makers. Cap and ball was everywhere. It took over. You've got probably 10, 20 companies getting into it through the Civil War and then short after. So you had Southern arsenals copying things because they couldn't buy them from the Northern arsenals. You had Northern arsenals stealing designs from engineers from other places, just tons and tons of goings on. And so Remington had made that one. And then shortly after the war, really the market started shifting towards who could make the best cavalry carbine. And so those single shot breech loaders for metallic cartridges all start coming in the late 60s into the early 70s. And the big turning point here is 1873. So that's kind of the first of the modern cartridge as we know it. That's when the 45-70 comes. Most of the cartridges are starting to go center fire. And I think at some point around there, the patent on the three-bore cylinder finally goes away, so we don't have to have all kinds of exotic cartridge types like cup fire and teat fire and all these things. And all of a sudden, we could start loading center fire rimmed revolver ammo in both the carbine and the revolver.
Which that was a huge year too for, center fire metallic cartridges and handguns, right, and revolvers with the 73 Colt, which is like the cowboy gun, which that was a 44-40, correct, to start out with? Yeah, so that was...
Or WCF.
Yep, okay, sure, yep. And, I'm assuming what you're going to lead into is the rolling block, right?
Yeah.
Coming up at least.
So the 1870-something Remington revolver was an upgrade from the 58. It was similar to what you'd look at and think of a conversion, but it was just our version of the Colt Single Action Army sold alongside the Remington rolling block.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, you can buy a package for horse soldiers that are going to go out and do any number of things on the plains.
Yep.
And so Remington was, again, trying to get some of that government contract. But again, other companies like Sharps and Spencer's and Colt and now Smith & Wesson,
Yep.
now all of these other companies are getting there first and getting there faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to drop in right there and say 1867 is a really important year for metallic cartridges.
Yep.
As
That's-
seen by this sign right
Yeah,
here.
that's the year the Union Metallic Cartridge Company was established.
Uh-huh.
So UMC is our route on the ammo side, and it goes way back to the tail end of paper cartridges, the end of like rimfire being the only option, and now we're getting into centerfire and rimfire of all different sizes.
Mhm.
And so for the next 40 years after that, it's just kind of a marketing and arms race of who can build a better mousetrap, guns and ammo wise.
Right.
Which I think it's noteworthy to add to that too. That period between, I guess probably pull it back to like mid 1850s all the way through to like the 1880s was huge for just overall firearm cartridge development, right?
Metallurgy, machining industry,
Right.
all of it came together to make this boom in gun design.
Right. And Remington's right there in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Right. And you go from the step, like you were saying, from paper to rimfire. So, like, arguably the first repeating rifle's the 1860 Henry, and that was in 44.
56 Henry, wasn't it? I don't
Okay,
remember.
maybe so, but it was rimfire, right?
Mhm.
So you go from that, which that gun was groundbreaking, and then like you were saying, you go to the you're introducing your 4570s and your 4440s, or not your 4440, and then you start to breach that centerfire realm. People are starting to conceptualize the idea of that sidearm, right?
Yeah.
But then, more importantly, like you also mentioned, which we talked about in cartridge development, is that you were able to go and buy a handgun. I'm saying handgun in general, and a sidearm as a rifle, and shoot similar calibers, if not the exact same caliber through them, which, like you also said, was big on the prairie, right? 45 Colt is an example of that, and that it was prolific and could be used for your long arm and your sidearm. So
Yeah, and I wasn't there, but I've seen Remington paintings and tons of movies, obviously. A lot of times they'd have a lever action and then their revolver, their sidearm. And then if they needed it, then they would have a rifle that had some more reach out there and get it type of stuff. So you'll wind up having all three of them if you so desire, and you'd have a rolling block and then a repeater. But
sure.
so basically this whole time and into the future of this last century, we're going to be talking about things where the government is supplying themselves designs and manufacturing. So at the end of the Civil War, we have a whole bunch of muskets sitting on the shelf. And so to make the next cartridge firearm for the Army, they don't want to go buy new Remingtons.
Right.
They want to retrofit those Springfield, Enfield, Brown Besses, whichever one it was. I'm trying to remember the actual
I think it was the Springfield. Like I was just thinking, I know where you're going with this.
1850.
I was thinking 48, or maybe it's 52, something like right around there. Yeah.
So they drop on a funky lock on the back of it called the trap door and chambered in 4570. They made the whole arsenal convert over, and then now the rifle looks the same, but you flip a catch, open it up, spits the shell out, you put a new cartridge in, you're ready to shoot again.
Yep.
So yeah, there's no reason that they would go and refit an entire peacetime army with brand new rifles off the shelf when they could, and you'll see that a lot of times. Arsenals want to do as close to minimum as possible to get their material up to the current technology.
Yeah, I mean, it has everything to do with money, just like it
Yeah.
still does. So they're trying to save money, but they're trying to put the best things in their people's hands.
Sure. Quick and easy.
Yeah.
So that takes us all the way up to let's say 1900s. 1891 gets into one of our favorite times in development history, which is here comes smokeless. Here comes bottleneck cartridges. So almost everyone in the world started looking at that. We covered it on the 303 show where different people were going different bore diameters, case capacities, types of propellant, maybe still black powder, maybe straight to cordite.
Ballastite, all those weird ones. Yep.
So America goes with the 3040 Craig, the Craig Jorgensen 1891 and 3040 Craig ammo. And Remington loads that. I don't know what percentage of it came from our factory, but quite a bit did. And I believe those rifles were made at Springfield Armory.
Yep, I believe so. And again, you know, just to reiterate, Remington being in the middle of that, that was a huge step. And that, you know, 4570 in the Springfield trapdoor is fairly similar, but now you're not having a single load, you know, ammunition.
Right.
You're actually able to fill a internal magazine in the firearm to carry your ammunition.
By the way, if you're unfamiliar and you didn't go buy one of those last time we talked about it,
Yep.
extremely novel and interesting magazine design.
Oh,
It's
yeah, with the door.
similar to a box magazine, but it loads from the bottom. So you flip open a door, the ammo's first in, first out. So as you keep filling it up, you keep consuming from the bottom of the stack instead of just refilling the box mag from above.
Yep.
Neat design.
Yeah, oh, it's super cool. It's a really unique rifle. I think that, you know, that was a big plus, and it's just really cool to see the progression, because then shortly thereafter we realized, like, well, okay, none of these are fed with the stripper clip, so now you're running around with loose ammunition essentially, which
Oh, they'd carry bandoliers all through there.
they would.
And then
Yeah.
that's, I think, the first one that you could actually clip up your ammo and had pouches instead of bandoliers.
Okay, well that makes sense. And see, that's the thing, is like, it wouldn't make sense for a soldier to be carrying loose ammo.
Yeah.
So, no,
Can't be
that
jingling.
totally- no.
Okay.
So
You can't sneak up on somebody when it's
Yeah.
rattling around.
So we finally gotten into a little bit of Remington ammunition at that point in time. At this, keep in mind, it's the UMC, because Remington and UMC don't come together until 1910, I believe.
Yep, I think you're right.
And that's just in time for the big war. And at that point in time, the 3040 is already outdated. It's only 10 years old. So they go ahead and start working on our favorite 30-06. And this is, again, government arsenal doing government work for the soldiers. And so the Springfield Armory comes up with the M1903. The cartridge is named the 30-03. And they start making the ammo, and they modified it in 30-06, changed the bullet profile and a little bit of the throat, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, I think y'all covered that. But at this point in time, Remington does finally get the opportunity to make some of these rifles.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how many at the very get-go original 1903s were made at Ilion. But later on, they made quite a few of them.
Yep, and I know Great Britain actually approached Remington specifically and inquired about receiving 1903s for use in what would eventually become, you know, the Great War. So, and that was, from what I understand, one of the larger customers of, you know, Remington made 1903 Springfields.
Yeah, so as we get into the actual war, and again, that was a lot of unrest happening. Things were politically unstable. By the time 1914 comes along, someone's going to fight. And so England and the Enfield Arsenal reached out to Remington with the new design, the P14, which was a modification of the previous Enfield rifles, and wanted them to produce that. So they made a whole bunch of P14s and 303 British for England. And they fought right alongside the SMLE that we discussed previously.
Yep.
It was still cock on closed. They ditched the 10-round magazine, dropped it down to, I believe, 6.
Yep.
And then at the same time, Remington did something very cool, which was went ahead and chambered it in 30-06. And so the same cock on closed action, same dog leg pattern stock, the Mad Minute
Yep.
on the bolt handle geometry, became the M1917. So a lot of people know about the M1903 for World War I, but the M1917 was the best rifle that fought in that war, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree. I totally agree. And I think,
I believe Sergeant Alvin York liked it too.
yep. And yeah, that was actually, yeah, I was going to
That's where you're going.
But I think also just on the, you know, collector market even, I think the 1917 is an underrated gun for enthusiasts. you
Yeah,
know.
especially you can find different arsenals had made them. I think Winchester, Springfield, and Remington made them. Remington actually had 2 factories. They idled almost all of their sporting arms production to support the war effort, and they also stood up a second gun plant called Eddystone.
Yep.
So you hear a lot of people talking about, I've got a 1917 from XYZ production date. It's an Eddystone. Almost no one ties that to Remington, but it was.
Yep.
So you'll have Ilion ones are probably the most desirable, and the Eddystone ones are still pretty dang good.
Yep.
And if you've ever handled one, look at them. Just the craftsmanship on them was
They're
pretty
good.
cool.
was nice,
The
yeah.
design's good. The sights are good. It's a true marksman's rifle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good gun. It's really cool. And not to shed or put shade on 1903, but I agree. I think the 1917 is the more desirable.
Well,
of
they
the two.
took England's homework and America's homework, and they kind of met in the middle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But one of my personal favorite Remington supporting efforts of World War I is the 1911s. So a lot of people see Remington Rand.
Yep.
And that's a different situation. But Remington UMC at Bridgeport made 1911s. Pretty small volume of them, but they're highly collectible.
Yeah, very desirable
Really well
nowadays.
made.
Yep.
And then, of course, we're loading all the ammo for all of that. We supported France's 8mm Lebel. We made Lebel repeaters. We made rolling blocks for the French army in 1914.
And that's back when like most of the ammo manufacturing was in Bridgeport, right?
Yep.
Yeah, once Peters joins the show later, then they have more locations.
Okay.
But for the most part, most of this is going on at Bridgeport.
Yep.
So by the end of World War I think we've gotten pretty used to selling ammo and guns to the government at that point. So
I think, yeah, and that was at a point too when, previously Remington had been, like you started off with, a little bit less popular, but still produced really reputable designs and had the capability. But now I think Remington, which, with the times, you went from, Spanish-American War to going into World War I, and then what we'll get to is World War II. That was a tumultuous time. Remington really started to invest with the gaining traction that they had in military contracts with producing of specific to us military ammunition and firearms. So that was like
these
they really started
breakpoints
digging.
also line up with shifts in management of the company. So originally a family-owned company.
Yeah.
Lifelet Jr., I think, died in 58 or 62, somewhere in the mid-1800s. His sons took over, and it was kind of a struggle bus for a period of time. And then Schiller, Hartley, and Graham, Marcellus Hartley specifically, took over for the second half of the 1800s and actually started really running a tight ship and a well-run business. It wasn't just like, hey, this is Dad's business. I'm doing what I can to figure it out. And they were all good businessmen. Don't misunderstand my train of thought here. But when Hartley and Graham take over, all of a sudden they're really growing and expanding and doing international sales.
Yeah. They just took it from like small family-owned business to like
Started
a
tightening it up.
manufacturing beast. Yeah.
In 1902, one of those breakpoints in history happens, leading to the 1911 when John Moses Browning walks into Marcellus Hartley's office, waiting on him to show him his new auto-loading shotgun because he's tired of making them for a one-time sale of design to Winchester. He wants to build them on royalty. And President Hartley dies in his office while John's waiting.
Had a heart attack.
Oh my
right there.
gosh.
Yep.
I didn't know that.
So option
story.
two-
It's a pretty crazy story.
That's
For John
insane.
Moses is he grabs his shotgun and gets on the boat and goes to Belgium.
Okay.
FN.
And while he's there, he realizes how popular these little pocket pistols are, not revolvers. And he starts messing around with the 1903, 1900, all of those.
The baby Browning, all those really tiny, guns that would probably arguably heavily influence his design for the 1911.
Oh, they all led straight up to it.
Yep.
And he was over there in Belgium pretty much that whole time working on those things. So real fun aside, just in that the pre-war period. And then 1910 in comes UMC. And I can't remember which direction it went, but they come together. And then now we've got another generation of management that goes from 1910 to 1934. So that interwar period, we've covered kind of what we did during the war. It kind of goes slow. And then DuPont comes along. All of a sudden, we're ready to make some serious volumes of Army ammo.
Yep. And that's when Lake City came in, or was this Lake City was specific to World War II, right?
All three of the Army ammo plants that I'm aware of that Remington built were for World War II.
Right. And
So almost immediately after Pearl Harbor, they had a strategic realization that we need to get all this to the heartland. We don't need to be storing munitions at the ports. So you see a lot of new bunkers and depots popping up in places like Indiana, McAllister, Oklahoma.
yeah, like really generic, not to discount them, but like,
Yeah.
Like Lone Oak, Arkansas.
right. Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
mainland Arkansas, nothing super fancy.
Right.
Yeah. So
Inexpensive.
DuPont at the time was a pretty significant government contractor for munitions of all shapes and sizes.
Right.
And so their small arms and ammo side, Remington, is who the government picks to build these Army ammo plants. So the Denver Arsenal, Salt Lake City, Utah, and Lake City in Kansas all come up almost at the same time really quick. And then all of a sudden, Bridgeport and the Peters factory in Kings Mills, Ohio, they're also making military ammo. So that's through the entire war effort. And then kind of after that, we were glut on supply.
Yep.
We were planning on island hopping
Yep.
and losing a lot of guns and ammo and people. So they idled production at almost all of those. So the government kept Lake City running, still runs today. Changes management every
15, I think it's
20 or
15.
30.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Sure.
because it's a contract you have to be
Yeah.
on.
Right.
But yeah, after that, once the Army ammo as a system is kind of established, we're back to sporting.
Yep. Which I'll say kind of a neat fact I've read about Remington, right? Remington at one point made both clay targets, clay throwers, shot shell ammo, and firearms. And there
And
was,
typewriters.
oh yeah, they made all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But Remington's had a pretty prolific history.
They
But
never let that factory sit down.
yeah, no, oh yeah,
Yeah, they
and the
just filled
R&D
whatever need they had.
and the development that they did in researching new technology and trying to branch the brand out just from guns alone was significant. But they, the Army had devised a plan to show and really instruct new gunners in airplanes and
Anti-aircraft
right
as well.
right, and anti-aircraft that the basic principles of leading a flying target would be best taught by shooting skeet. So there's actually a point in history where Remington supplied both all four: shotguns, ammo, and targets and throwers to the Army for contract training, which I thought was awesome.
Yeah,
But-
you can still buy those throwers too.
Oh, yeah.
Perhaps
We have
for
a
a short
few.
period of time, also the 50 caliber ammo that they would shoot later from the Browning M2 in the waist of a bomber.
Yeah.
Kind of neat stuff.
Oh yeah.
I like all the pictures. I think it was from World War II where all the women are in the factory loading the ammo.
Yeah.
You can see it down on our timeline in like the first floor. Big Rose of the Riveter time.
Oh yeah.
That entire period of history, it was, and I hate to use the word women's work, but you look at factory work for a war effort, Rosie the Riveter is kind of the figurehead of ladies at the home front going and working and doing. Ammo has been very traditionally staffed by women laborers for the last 150 years.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you want my opinion, they do a better job. I will stand by that statement. You write down a process and you get someone like me in there that decides that it's wrong
Yeah.
and gets creative. Things go odd. But kind of touching on Leland's commentary about development, behind the scenes is one of my favorite parts of the Remington history with defense contractors and things like that. We're constantly working on science experiments. Government needs this ammunition to get lighter. You got brass cartridge 50 cal in the wing of a P-51 Mustang, and you're at max capacity on fuel and ammo. They tried so hard for about 20 years, all through World War II and after, to make aluminum case ammo work. And steel case actually did get development at Denver.
Yeah.
And anything to shave some pounds and obviously cost on the criticals like copper.
Yep.
Right.
Remington and DuPont Engineering put tons of gray material behind those logistical problems that still today plague the defense industry.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because those details, like, even on a soldier's person, but the more you have to spend on your payload for hauling the ammo, especially in those fighters, in that time when we were
Fuel on the road.
right. Oh yeah, for sure. You're talking about the European theater. You're talking about the airplanes that were in the Pacific, right? Island hopping. You were fighting the Japanese in areas that required you to basically control the atolls and these islands, and that ability to not have to land and refill or or rearm
Yeah.
was so critical.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the lighter the ammo, the farther a man can walk and the farther a vehicle can go.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
for
can
sure.
carry the same amount of ammo and go
Yeah.
further,
Mm-hmm.
or you can carry more ammo and then put more hurt when you get there.
Mm-hmm.
And in any use case, it's going to be a better situation. That's exactly why we talked about the 223 being such a groundbreaking change
Yeah.
for the infantry.
Yep.
So it was the same in the air, only it was all material based.
Right.
But yeah, looking through some of those old research reports that we have access to, and the status updates and things like that, the problems they were trying to solve, it really makes me feel like a small mind of an engineer
Oh, yeah.
compared to the stuff that happened in the
That it
past.
took back then, yeah.
And I've got to say, those engineers that conceptualized and tested all this stuff without computers is it's an artwork, or the drafts that they wrote. I mean, those people that wrote your drawings by hand, and not just in Remington, in general, was an absolute artwork. Nowadays, I feel
A little
like we're
bit
so
of a
spoiled.
math nerd
Yeah.
observation. If you see hand charted data that has a regression, hand calculated, someone's really, really working to make
Oh,
a
yeah.
statistically relevant decision. And that's all through all of these wars we're talking about, all the way up into the 70s before we get into,
Relying
computers.
on computers.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it was super cool, and firearms design back then, and even to the original Remington days. I mean, it was a craftsmanship. It really was. But yeah, but moving on from World War II, then more or less the present day, or I guess we probably should skip over Vietnam. Of course, there's a lot of details there.
No, we had our part there as well, and the Korean conflict. So you could go ahead and just consider Korea a aftershock of World War II.
Right, there was not a lot of new novel equipment. It was upgraded or slightly different.
I think even all of the M1 ammo, the M1 carbine ammo and the 30-06 was all still from loaded in the 40s. So we were probably there, but
Yeah.
we didn't make any of those guns to my awareness.
No.
Yeah.
And I mean, even Singer, the sewing machine factory, made some of the M1 carbines, but
Yep.
I don't believe Remington did. One that we did forget for World War II is yet again the M1903. One of the most desirable models is an Ilium-produced M1903 A4 Sniper. And those are really sweet rifles. It's got the scope and everything. They still use the bolt action, even though they had M1 Garand Sniper variants.
The M1D, I think,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Yep.
So all of that is still being used in Korea. And as we kind of discussed on the 223, between 50 and 70, stuff changes again. And again, it's that R&D work where they went from 1957 all the way through 62 to land on the 223 Remington.
Yep. Because wasn't it adopted in 63?
Yeah, I think the Air Force bought off on it first,
Okay.
and then the Army subsequently.
Yep.
But
Yep.
yeah, and you could say that started in 1950 with the 222, but that was a sporting cartridge.
Right.
So
Which we have an episode on
Yes, we
such
do.
cartridge. So.
On such cartridge. Check it out.
well, it's featured in the 223.
Right.
So, yeah, again, guns are coming from a contractor who's made them. The design work was all very cross-functional between the government and several different private companies. So in comes the M16 to replace the M14. Y'all have also covered 308, which was that kind of bridged the gap. 308 and 7.62 didn't go anywhere, but it's no longer on the hip of the average soldier.
Right.
So we developed and designed and perfected the cartridge that is now our current warfighting cartridge. And that's not a small thing.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, it's still prolific today. So, albeit things are starting to change nowadays too, in directions of, mentalities of people carrying, heavier caliber ammunition versus lighter, but still, it's still prevalent today for
Yeah.
Well,
sure.
you
And
see the
popular in the civilian
pendulum.
market.
Do you want more rounds downrange, or do you want more effect from every round?
Right.
So, and to that effect, you start talking about snipers. All of a sudden, in Vietnam, the use case of an individual with a good rifle just explodes in usefulness out there in these new places to fight that they've got.
Yeah.
New
Really no
landscapes,
experience.
new terrain, new
Yeah.
environments.
Triple canopy.
So you
Yeah.
wind up
jungles and-
with these heroes of the generation, like Carlos Hathcock and Chuck Mulvaney. And in comes Remington with the M40.
Yeah.
A really good rifle built off of the Model 700, which came in 1962. And then from there on out, the Marines and the Army are using Remington bolt-action rifles for sniping, adding an optic. And the ammo generally is coming from an Army ammo plant, but we have in the past done match-grade ammo. So,
Yep.
And then after the Vietnam War, do we move into sporting, or when did we started sporting way back when? But now we focus primarily on sporting ammunition.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this whole time, while we're making sporting ammunition for, excuse me, especially GIs coming home from World War II, is when your market really, really, really takes off.
Yes. Yeah.
And a lot of our marketing from those days of those paintings of a guy in the plaid jacket with his kid, in the 50s, that really starts that generation of sporting ammunition. And there is an actual arms race in our civilian market to get better hunting equipment and all these things for this new explosion in interest in the outdoors.
Yep.
Because it was always there.
Yeah.
But it became like a household thing to get into hunting and shooting.
Yeah.
And you could make the argument that there's a lot of connection to that with a lot of these GIs coming back from World War II and, just kind of carrying on the same mentality that they had brought to the World War II, which was, homesteading, taking care of stuff, just like, it followed suit of that. And that same mentality affected other industries, automotive industry and housing industry, but it definitely affected sporting arms, and Remington was very critical in that too.
Well, you can literally see it in like the hunting world. If you look at the like wildlife conservation numbers, I mean, you take most of America's men, you teach them how to use a gun, and then you send them home. They're gonna want to go hunting.
Yeah, the next thing they do is invent the barbecue pit and the sports car.
Exactly.
And now you have America.
Yeah.
Is literally how that went.
Yeah.
So sniping rifles were a big hit from Remington. Ammunition is pretty well manufactured and taken care of by the government. That holds pretty steady through the 80s. Then the Army introduces the M24, another good sniper rifle. And hit and miss here and there on little individual ammo contracts that we load for one person or another. I'd say our next real big hit is going to be in the global war on terror.
Sure.
With the introduction of the 300 AAC Blackout. And that one was one that we at this facility had a lot of pride in, to the point where it was storied that one of our Blackout cartridges is what killed Osama bin Laden. And how do you verify that? I don't know. If you Google it, they'll say it was an HK 416, but we know who we sold that ammo to.
Yeah.
And we know what they went out there and did in the middle of the night. And that was our sister company, Advanced Armament, made the rifle, the can. We made the ammo as a system. We gave that to the Navy SEALs, and they went out and did cool shit with it.
Yeah.
And to the day, we even have some shot shell cartridges here and there that wind up in fighting guns. Excuse me. Re-say that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And to this day, we still have shot shell cartridges shipping overseas, going in fighting guns.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's really like interesting if you just like look at it in big picture. It's like, you went from what you called like paper and ball. What'd you call it?
Yeah. Oh, just paper cartridges.
Cap and ball.
Paper cartridges, cap and ball. Thank you. And then, you roll into like full blown cartridges because they're easier to use. And then you get into like the area of development where you need them to be faster and lighter.
Yep.
And then you get into the area of development where you need them to be more accurate. And now I feel like we're getting into the area of development where it's like, can we make it quiet?
I mean, there's a big market, both civilian and military, that is really focused on limiting report of firearms. And I think also, I'll mention kind of off that too, in that Remington was fairly crucial in the development of 6.8 SPC.
Well, we semi-standardized that. We introduced that as a standard cartridge from this facility.
Yep. Which that also was right at that time where we started to, as a country, kind of rethink about how we wanted soldiers to be carrying ammunition. Like you said, is it you send more at them, or with every hit you hit them harder, right? And that was
mobility changed. So you don't really have a whole bunch of guys walking across Europe with everything they need to fight with.
Right.
You're in, you're out. And it really started during Vietnam with the insertion via helicopter and extraction via helicopter. you might stay the night. But it's now not a huge problem to carry some extra heavy ammo if you need to. So they start to shift thinking as that gets even faster and lighter.
Right.
So,
And that was fairly integral into that.
Yeah, because I mean, like you go from literally line shooting to like trench warfare to like just the way we fight wars has changed, so the ammunition has to change with it.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
one fun thing, I brought up shot shell. You know, we load slugger and things like that, training buckshot. That one almost hasn't changed since World War One. So when the trench guns entered the chat, we were almost always the ones loading the shot shell ammo. So double out buckshot's pretty cool stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you could argue that it's more effective nowadays because of, barrel technology, which even off of that really was beyond that. Really, that stuff today, or that stuff is very much similar to what we're producing today, which you can shoot through a normal gun. So, yeah.
Yeah, you don't need a lot of choke constriction or anything like that. Of course, they played with duck-bill chokes and all kinds of funny things. Spread your pattern wide, keep it tied up and down, but the ammo has hardly changed.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thanks for walking through the wars with me today, guys.
Yeah.
It's been really really helpful and interesting to see where Remington's been.
Remington's been right in the middle of it through the whole thing, and still will be in the future. So.
Yeah. I like to say that America and Remington have grown together.
Yeah, fact. That's a fact. That's a good way to say it.
Well, there you have it, guys. Remington is on the rise. Like, comment, subscribe, and be sure to share this podcast with your hunting or shooting buddies. Be on the lookout for the next episode. You can find us anywhere you can stream podcasts. And to reach me, Leland, or Jimmy here, you can email us at podcast@remington.com. Happy Memorial Day.